Hello, I'm Toycat, and today you are witnessing history because the UK is about to get slightly smaller because we just signed a deal to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, and then we're going to lease back a small percent of those islands for £101 million a year. This raises the obvious question of why are we giving something away to then lease it back? That feels like it defeats the purpose of at least one of those two things, and more importantly, there's the question of, okay then, so is this good for the native people of these islands? And the answer can probably be summed up in this one image, and so then there's the geography nerd question of, does this mean the sun has finally set on the British Empire? And the answer is still not quite yet, and let's explain all of this and more in today's video. So for those not familiar, the UK looks on a map like it just covers Great Britain and its surrounding islands, but actually the UK still holds onto a decent amount of the former empire, and this sounds like a thing that's like, oh yeah, we're not letting them go independent, but actually it's when, during the process of decolonization, the UK had a lot of places with millions of people asked to go independent, and we worked out the process over a period of years, but lots of these places that are still part of the empire have fewer than 50,000 people living there. In fact, lots of them have fewer than 50 people living there, and it's not really practical to set up a country when you have such a low population. And so many of these places have remained a part of the UK, and they still get to self-govern. They have their own prime ministers. In the case of some of these, like Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, they have their own currencies, but they get access to UK consular assistance and our military and all of the other benefits of the UK. So basically, all of these places stay part of the UK, and we let them stay part of the UK. It's a beneficial arrangement for both sides, you might argue. I used to be really skeptical about it, but I have spoken to people from Gibraltar and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, and they all seem to be on board with the status quo as the best option. And so what's interesting is this is the case for most of these places. The native people or the people who were there at time of otherwise independence have stayed, but the British Indian Ocean Territory is a bit different. Even if you are the most pro-Britain, as I am today, I'm a British cowboy today, I love the UK, but I have to concede we kind of messed up with the British Indian Ocean Territory. Because unlike those other places where the people who were there before stayed and we just kind of let them stay a part of the UK, the British Indian Ocean Territory has a bit of a notable different story. So if you haven't seen their flag yet, by the way, this is it. By far the coolest UK overseas territory flag. It's a shame that as of a few days from now, this won't be in existence anymore. Look at the coat of arms, it's got turtles on it. Sorry, I love this. Anyway, so the interesting thing about this is that the British Indian Ocean Territory is a bit of a messed up different story because the Chagos archipelago had native people called the Chagossians living there, and so unlike those other places where we said, okay, we'll let the Chagossians stay a part of the UK, in the 1980s, we forcibly desettled them, is I think the politest term, but we did a very messed up thing and we moved them all off the islands. Some of them moved to London, near Gatwick, some of them moved to Mauritius, some of them moved to Hong Kong, there's a whole diaspora, but none of them live in the Chagos Islands anymore because they've all been settled elsewhere. Why did we do that? Because we wanted a military base. Not for ourselves, bear in mind. The US wanted a military base, and we agreed that they could lease our land if they gave us some nuclear missiles. It's actually nuclear missiles for submarines, but it's a whole interesting thing, and so as a result, the UK has some superpowered nuclear submarines, and the US has a military base on British soil in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's a useful deal for both sides until recently, where again, it's not out of any moral obligation, but out of a court obligation, the African Union has been pushing very heavily for the last few decades for this to be undone. A lot of Africa became decolonized in the 1950s and 60s, and so there is a deep story. If you ever see the UN making big pushes for decolonization, even in like places that don't make sense, it's because about a quarter of the world's nations feel very strongly that like, oh yeah, the way that decolonization was handled is kind of bad. And you know, that's a decent summary of events, but how strongly is something you can disagree with. And so basically the African Union, and indeed Mauritius, brought a case against the UK to the International Court of Justice, and they won. And so basically the argument here is that as a result, the UK needs to make sure that it gives back. So here it is. The UK is under an obligation to bring to an end its administration of the Chagos archipelago as quickly as possible. This advisory opinion was delivered in 2019, and all International Court of Justice opinions, it's literally an international organization, but because there's no such thing as international law without international enforcement, it's basically saying, look, as a world, we, or, as a world, right, as the closest thing we have to a world court, we think that you shouldn't hold on to those islands anymore. And so the UK had two choices. One was just to say, yeah, good opinion of court. What are you gonna do? You're gonna enforce that with guns? You're gonna send the bailiffs around to our house and collect the islands? I don't think so. Or the second choice is to say, actually, complying with international law makes sense in most cases, and so that is what the UK has decided to try and do. There's a few arguments about why this is. Again, if there was if there was another country, pick China, pick India, pick Iran, pick whatever. If another country decided that they wanted to take over some of this territory, we wouldn't be able to legally be like, hey, they're stealing our territory, because they'd be legally stealing. There's all sorts of weird things about like the ocean around it, which represents most of its area. If we want to go to the thumbnail, well, let's do thumbnail talk early on. If we talk about this number from the thumbnail, this area that the British Indian Ocean Territory represents is actually 99.99% ocean. So the actual value in terms of territory is a military base for the America, which we probably get some money from. Sorry, that's the wrong thing. But then, this number that you're seeing right here is actually mostly ocean, and so that value for the ocean only makes sense if it is protected by law. You might argue. I don't think it's a very strong argument. I think the much stronger argument that is actually played into it is the argument that, yeah, okay, we've got to look like a country that respects international law, and ultimately, even though we've had to sign a deal where we spend £101 million a year, if you're curious, it's actually front-loaded. It's even worse than it might sound. You pay $165 million for the first year, then $120 million, and then they get indexed to inflation, and also we have to give $45 million to support Mauritian development, although that has British firms being involved to the maximum extent possible, and then there's a £40 million payment to set up a trust fund for Chagossians. So that is the deal that we have signed. We have front-loaded a bunch of money, and we'll be spending somewhere in the tune to $3 to $4 billion to give over territory to then have back the piece that we actually need. Because the truth is, even though there's a decent argument here that the actual value in the territory is the ocean, right? The actual value to us, the most important cannot lose bit, is the military base that we need to lease to the United States because we need to have those submarines. And so we're basically spending $4 billion to keep the status quo as far as submarines are concerned. And we're basically spending $4 billion to follow international law while losing about 7/8 of the territory. And so, yeah, that is the deal from the UK's behest. And it seems a little goofy at first. And I am someone who, again, I'm someone who feels very emotionally that this is one of the dumbest things we've ever done. I think on the instinct, like, if a country wants to have some territory, because if you look into the court's ruling, if you look into the justification for why we should give this back, because I haven't really explained that one yet, have I? Like, oh yeah, well, we resettled people, but they weren't Mauritians when we desettled them, so why do we have to give it back? Well, their argument, and the court's deep opinion here, is that the process of decolonization in Mauritius was not lawfully completed when Mauritius acceded to independence in 1968. Basically, the UK, so the UK is, like in the same way that when we administered Australia, we administered it as a bunch of different places, which we then said, oh yeah, you guys can all be packaged up and become a country if you want to. And to this day, outside of the single independence referendum in Western Australia, to this day, Australia has still decided to stay together, but if they want to, right, they could split up if they want. And so the other way around is what we did, is we've administered a bunch of our territories around here together, Mauritius and the British Indian Ocean Territory. They're very far apart, but just to avoid having multiple governors, in the same way that right now, we administer St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha as one country, or as one overseas territory. It's not because they're one place, but they are administered as if they are one place. So there's a kind of messy argument in the fact that we said, you are one place, while they were a colonial unit, but then before independence we said, okay, you, the people of Mauritius, can go independent, but the territory over here we're going to hold on to, because and basically that is not something that was considered to be legal. And that is the whole thing which this whole case, kind of rests on. Should you as a country get to decide when your colonies are split or not? And because, the UK has an example of doing this to drastic ends. I think the UK split Ireland into two just before Ireland was about to go independence, so that the parts of Ireland that wanted to stay part of the UK could. And the issues that have caused, the troubles you might say that has caused, has been long-standing in many ways. And so is splitting territories before giving them away an okay thing to do? It really depends on who you think gets to own land, or who you think gets to own a country. Can anyone own a country? Can a country own another country? Is it okay that for example, London owns Exeter? Is it okay that I met someone from Cornwall recently and they said I love when I mention Cornwall? Is it okay that London owns Cornwall, or that Cornwall owns London? Cornwall gets to send their people into London and then they get to make decisions for the rest of the UK. Why does Cornwall get to own Norwich? Why does Norwich get to own Wolverhampton? The argument is that I think once you really start diving into the argument of how you can split and unsplit territories, like self-determination works great when there are people groups that are neatly defined, but we have neatly defined people groups for Mauritius, Mauritians, and then we have the Chagos Islands, the Chagossians. Why is it that we get to argue that Mauritians should rule over Chagossians, or why should British people rule over Chagossians? The actual moral argument, rather than the one that's been pushed heavily by a bunch of African nations here, the moral argument, if you're going to have to make one that isn't just you own it because you own it, should be, well, the people own the place. And so what is the deal with the people of the Chagos Islands? Well, they're really upset. At the very last minute, they won an injunction, actually, to halt the deal signed with Mauritius. However, it moved forwards a few hours later. At 2:25 a.m., there was the interim relief. It all happened. But basically, what ended up happening here is that the Chagos Islands have been pushed to the side here, because actually the UK, by following international law, we don't have to make things right. We have to make things right with a nation that feels wronged, that have nothing to do with the people that are actually being wronged. And so out of this deal, out of the £4 billion-ish that we're spending, literally, is it 1% of that deal? Yeah, about 1% of that deal ends up going to the Chagossians, with 99% going to Mauritius. And again, if you're a Mauritian right now, look how happy they are. Like, you just got billions of pounds and territory. Imagine that, right? Imagine you're just chilling as the UK, and then Iceland says tomorrow, please can we join you, UK? And we're like, I don't know about this one. They're like, we'll give you £4 billion too. That would be a cool moment, right? I would accept Iceland if you're looking to join a country anytime soon. I don't think you are, though, because I think what Iceland would prefer is probably, just a hypothetical here, is the governance of themselves. So there's a moral argument that's not met. There's a, like a might makes right argument that's not met. And so the only reason that we're going into this is because of the legal argument. And the legal argument comes from the International Court of Justice. And yeah, it's going to be a really interesting, it's a really interesting world, in my opinion, that there was this huge negotiation that kind of just ended up with a lot of, I think a lot of the world looking at it and being like, oh yeah, so the UK, if you get an international judgment signed against them, they'll just give you territory and they'll pay you to take it from you. But I would also say, okay, as a nation, our reputation is our, again, I'm gonna make the case for why this isn't the worst thing ever. I'm a contrarian to the level where even one of these things that just emotionally feels so wrong to me, I'm gonna make the argument that actually our reputation as the UK is our biggest asset. We were the first country to industrialize. We were the biggest country for a while. We were the most powerful country for a while. But those days are past us. But the one thing we hold on to, despite being the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th biggest economy, but we're a top 10 economy despite being a tiny island of, let's be honest, some pretty rough-looking places. But like we are, have you been to Exeter recently? It was actually quite nice last time I met. But let's pick a random. This is actually a really nice. This looks like the world's 8th largest economy, doesn't it? Let's pick another street. What if they're all nice streets? What if Exeter is actually just a nice place? I think that's what it is. I think Exeter might be somewhere you want to live. But let's go to Slough. That's always what you got to do in these cases, right? If you need to show that, like, oh yeah, does this look like the 8th richest place in the world? Is this our inherent resources? No. The thing that I think allows us a lot of extra benefit on the international stage is our international reputation. It's called soft power, because every country has hard power, which is if Iceland didn't want to join the UK, we could send a bunch of troops over there to fight them. But the far bigger reason we don't is that we want to maintain the soft power of not looking like a nation that invades our neighbors. Russia clearly doesn't care about that second type of power. But the soft power is one of the most important things you have as a country because it's far cheaper. Sending soldiers to Iceland is expensive. That's why only mums shop there. But sending soldiers is really expensive, whereas, sending an email is much cheaper. And so if we can maintain great relations with a whole continent under this ruling, if we can maintain great relations with the world, who looks at us and goes, ooh, Yeah, look at the UK. They made a difficult political decision. Literally, they handed out, again, right now, the UK, we've just found out that we're even deeper in our budget deficit than we thought. We have 20.2 billion pounds of borrowing in April. Think about that. In 1 month, we borrowed 20.2 billion pounds, and so we're gonna have to borrow this extra money, by the way. It's not like, oh, we don't have like a pool, we don't have a money pit we're gonna dig out from to give the Chagos Islands. We're gonna borrow some extra money to give to them. We made the really complicated and really hard sell politically of giving away territory and paying for it because it was the right thing to do, and so that's a good sign for a country if you can do that. Whereas, if you look at populous countries that can only do what is broadly popular with their population at any given point in time, and that changes wildly based on the domestic political needs, it's a less strong look for a country. Anyway, with that said, I've got one last point to raise, which is, so is the British Indian Ocean Territory now a part of the the Mauritius? So the interesting answer to that question is no. The deal has been signed, but not yet ratified, and so as soon as that deal is ratified, this will cease to exist. This will instead just become, this will instead just look like this, and I hate to say it, but they've got a Lithuania flag with an extra stripe. Not a big fan of the new flag. I like their coat of arms. It's got this quirky little puzzle piece parrot, I want to say, and this quirky little deer. I like what's going on here with your coat of arms, but Mauritius, it just doesn't stand a. Look at this. It's got waves because it's in the ocean. It's love this a lot. Anyway, so as soon as that deal is ratified, the British Indian Ocean Territory will be a thing of history. And as soon as this becomes a thing of history, then the sun will set on the British Empire. Because here's the deal. This is the current... I'll actually refresh it just to make sure. This is the current sun map of the world as I record this video. It's 11 a.m. where I'm at, and this means that in about an hour, at 12 a.m., the sun will be directly overhead. We'll be at peak brightness in the UK, and so the interesting thing here, therefore, is that if you look at the map, you can see that the middle of America is just waking up, their sun is just rising, whereas the west coast is still deep in darkness. Now, if we move forward, let's say 12 hours, I think that's going to be about right. Yeah, if we move forwards about 12 hours, we find this, although we have to now add an hour, no, that's, yeah, plus an hour, plus an hour. If you move forwards to here, the only part of the UK, so if we look at all of our territories, you can see the Pitcairns are about aligned with LA, I guess to be simple, like California over there. And the British Indian Ocean Territory is aligned roughly with India. So if there is a point like this, where the... Okay, so we'll just add another out. If we get to a point like this, where Cyprus is in darkness, because Cyprus is now our furthest east territory, and the Pitcairns are in darkness, so Cyprus, dark. Pitcairns, like, you know, California, technically dark. Wow, that will create a moment at around 3 a.m., whenever the deal has been ratified by the Mauritian Parliament. As soon as the deal is ratified at 3 a.m., there will be a moment where the sun is officially set on the entire British Empire, but just the UK, all at the same time, and that moment will end over 200 years of history. And again, I have a lot of fascination in this personally, but that's where it ends. I think there was so much talk of like, is the US going to veto this? Are we going to just back out from this at the last minute? But as a country, we have decided this is what we want, apparently. Or I guess actually, interestingly, we haven't. This is a case where the executive has decided this would be wildly unpopular. It would never pass a referendum. But despite that, we are going to do it, and it will make us look good in front of the International Court of Justice. And I think that is an interesting case for a country to be in. But yeah, the UK is officially getting smaller, and if you're curious, that means that the sun has never set on the US military empire, and I think France as well are now the only countries remaining where the sun never sets. And yeah, with that said, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I've been IBX. Howdy, cat. I didn't even do my cowboy accent at all today. So if you want a really loose TLDR, in case y'all fell asleep during this video, the British Indian Ocean Territory is soon not going to exist. It still exists right now, both on Google Maps and on Wikipedia, until there is the handover of the ratification, at which point the sun will set on the British Empire and the UK will be paying around £4 billion, which I believe in American dollars is actually something closer to $5 billion. They'll be spending $5 billion for the privilege. Isn't that delightful? I think y'all find that it's not. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope y'all enjoy it, and I'll probably, this is the end of politics season for a little bit. I had a good run. But yeah, I think we've had I still will be covering the fun bits of it as they come out on this channel. It's one of my favorite things to do. But it's been a while since we've just done some classic map stuff. And so let's get back into that, starting soon. Thank you, and second channel, don't care. Goodbye.